We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad already approved it. That was the first sentence she said to me at 11:47 p.m. on the first night I slept in the beach house I had spent 12 years building my way toward. I was still sitting on the back porch when the call came, barefoot, wrapped in a faded gray sweatshirt, listening to the Atlantic hit the shore in slow, steady breaths. The house was finally quiet. No client emails, no office politics, no hospital memories, no family obligations. Just me, the wind, and the kind of peace I had not felt in years. Then my phone lit up with Victoria Beckett, my stepmother, the woman who had spent so long rearranging my life that sometimes even her audacity sounded routine. At first, I honestly thought I had misheard her. "I'm sorry?" I asked. She gave a short sigh, like I was the difficult one. "Your father needs rest, and the city has been exhausting. We'll take the primary suite, obviously. There's a smaller room in the back you can use. If that doesn't work for you, you can leave." I didn't speak. My hand tightened so hard around the phone that my knuckles started aching. Then she added, in that crisp, polished voice she used whenever she wanted cruelty to sound sensible, "Let's not make this emotional, Bonnie." That was always her favorite trick. Cross a line, then call your reaction the problem. I looked out at the dark water, at the porch light reflecting against the railing I had paid for, the house key still warm in my pocket, the mortgage papers still sitting unsigned in spirit if not in ink on the kitchen counter. Mine. Every board, every window, every sleepless year that paid for it. And somehow, less than 24 hours after I moved in, she was already speaking as if I were the guest. So I smiled. Not because I was happy, not because I was calm, because in that exact moment, something inside me stopped bending. "Of course," I told her softly. "I'll make sure everything is ready when you arrive." She hung up without saying goodnight. If quiet strength means something to you, subscribe and stay with me. Because what Victoria didn't know was this. Her call didn't ruin my first night in that house. It clarified the rest of my life. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed on that porch long after the call ended, my phone still in my hand, the screen dark now, reflecting a version of me I hadn't met before. Not the one who stayed quiet to keep peace. Not the one who waited for permission to belong. This version didn't feel small. It felt still. And when you've lived through years of being overlooked, you learn the difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from clarity. This wasn't fear. This was the kind of quiet that comes right before something changes for good. Inside, the house still smelled like fresh paint and ocean air. My boxes were only half unpacked. A single wine glass sat on the counter next to the folder holding my closing documents. I walked over, opened it, and ran my fingers over the numbers again. $4.8 million. Every dollar earned, saved, invested. No inheritance, no help, no shortcuts. Just years of being invisible and using that invisibility to build something no one could take. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. I picked up my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Bonnie, is everything okay?" He sounded awake, alert. Not like someone who had just approved moving into a house that wasn't his. "Did you tell Victoria she could move into my place?" I asked. There was a pause, a real one this time. "What? No!" he said, confusion bleeding into his voice. "She told me you invited us for the weekend." And there it was. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a shift. A single piece of truth sliding into place. Because when you've lived around someone like Victoria long enough, you start to recognize the pattern not in what they say, but in what doesn't match. "I didn't invite anyone, Dad," I said gently. Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll talk to her," he said. But I already knew that wasn't going to fix anything. Because this had never been about miscommunication. This was about access, control, and rewriting reality until everyone else adjusted to it. "I'll handle it," I told him. I hung up before he could argue. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind had finally stopped negotiating with things it already understood. Around 3:12 a.m., I opened my laptop. By 3:18, I was reviewing property records. By 3:27, I was texting the one person who had ever looked at things in my life without emotion clouding the facts. Marcus Trent. My attorney. My safeguard. My reality check. "Are you awake?" I wrote. He replied in less than a minute. "I am now." What happened? I stared at the screen for a second, then typed the sentence that would quietly set everything in motion. I think something's been taken, and I need to know how far it goes. Some of you listening know that moment, when it's no longer about what someone said, but about what they've been doing behind the scenes. If that feeling sounds familiar, you're not imagining it. And what I was about to uncover was a lot bigger than a beach house. Marcus didn't ask me to explain over text. He never did. Come to the office in the morning, he wrote. Bring anything you have. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He didn't react emotionally. He built understanding piece by piece, like something that needed to hold weight. By 7:45 a.m., I was dressed, keys in hand, moving through a house that already felt watched. Not physically, but claimed. There's a difference. If you've ever had someone treat your space like it belongs to them before you've even settled into it, you know exactly what I mean. I drove into Charleston with the windows down, letting the salt air clear whatever was left of the night out of my chest. Marcus's office sat on East Bay Street, glass walls, clean lines, nothing unnecessary. The kind of place where everything had a purpose. He was already there when I walked in. Coffee, legal pad, laptop open. Start from the beginning, he said. So I did. The call, the assumption, my father's confusion. The way it didn't feel new, just louder. He listened without interrupting, only writing down timestamps and keywords. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. You said your father sounded surprised? Yes. And you're certain the property is solely in your name? I closed 3 days ago. It's mine. He nodded once. Then he turned his laptop toward me. I was already reviewing something connected to your father last year, he said. Didn't think much of it at the time. My stomach tightened. On the screen was a scanned document, a transfer deed, dated April 2024. Property, Mount Pleasant Residence, grantor, Gerald A. Beckett, grantee, Hale Premier Properties LLC. I blinked. What is that? I asked, though something inside me had already answered. Marcus tapped the signature line. That's the problem. I leaned in closer. At first glance, it looked right. Same name, same general flow. But the longer I stared, the more something felt off. You see it? He asked. I nodded slowly. The G is wrong. Exactly. He pulled up 3 more documents, my father's will, a medical authorization, and a birthday card scan I had sent him years ago for a separate matter. Side by side, the difference was obvious. Not dramatic, but undeniable. This isn't variation, Marcus said. This is imitation. My throat went dry. You're saying someone forged his signature to transfer his house? I'm saying it strongly suggests that, he replied carefully. We'll need a forensic examiner to confirm. I sat back in the chair. The beach house suddenly felt smaller in my mind, because this wasn't about someone being controlling or overstepping. This was about something deliberate, structured, planned. And if you've ever had that moment where a person you thought was just difficult suddenly looks calculated, you know how fast everything inside you shifts. How far do you want to go with this? Marcus asked. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was, I already knew. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because something in me had finally decided I wasn't going to keep adjusting to things that were clearly wrong. I want the truth, I said. Marcus nodded. Then we build it properly. And that's exactly what we started doing. Piece by piece. Quietly. Carefully. Because sometimes, the strongest move you can make is not reacting right away. Marcus didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed. No dramatic statements. No, we've got her. No urgency for the sake of adrenaline. Just structure. First, we verify, he said. Then we trace. Then we decide what action makes sense. It sounded simple, but when you've lived in emotional chaos for years, structure feels unfamiliar, almost too calm for what's happening. He emailed the document to a forensic examiner that same morning, someone he trusted, someone who didn't speculate, only concluded. While we wait, he added, we look at financial movement. That phrase stayed with me. Financial movement. Not spending. Not lifestyle. Movement. He pulled up another file. 3 withdrawals from your father's IRA, he said, turning the screen toward me again. Total. $380,000. I leaned forward. Date spread across 2024. Amounts clean. Rounded. Where did it go? He clicked. Account under the name V. Hale. My chest tightened slightly. Victoria, not even hidden well. Just assumed. That's not all, he continued. There's also a credit line opened under your father's name. How much? Current balance is around $47,000. I let out a slow breath. And he doesn't know? Marcus looked at me directly. If what you're telling me is accurate, he doesn't. The room felt very still. Not tense. Just precise. Like everything had shifted from emotion into evidence. And something about that felt both terrifying and grounding at the same time. Because feelings can be dismissed. But patterns? Patterns hold. What about the house? I asked. We'll confirm the deed with the county and wait for the forensic report, he said. But Bonnie, this doesn't look accidental. No, it didn't. And that was the moment I stopped asking, why would she do this? And started asking something else. How long has this been happening? Some of you listening know that shift. When the question changes from confusion to timeline. From, did this happen? To, how much have I not seen? Marcus closed his laptop halfway. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there was. There's a secondary savings account. I didn't speak. I just nodded for him to continue. $215,000. Transfers labeled as household expenses. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. The language. The way things get hidden behind words that sound normal. Groceries, maintenance, utilities. All the places no one questions. Total. Marcus wrote it down and turned the legal pad toward me. $1,842,000. I stared at the number, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Trust, time, and the quiet assumption that no one was paying attention. Marcus's voice softened slightly. You don't have to decide anything today. I nodded, but I already had. Because this wasn't just about protecting assets anymore. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't protected for a very long time. My place, my voice, my right to not be rewritten. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix it. They arrived the next morning at 10:12 a.m. 2 SUVs, not subtle, not tentative, packed like they weren't visiting, but relocating. I was already dressed, already calm, already standing in the kitchen when I heard the gravel shift under the tires. Coffee in hand, phone on silent. Mind clear. That was the part that surprised me the most. I wasn't nervous. When you've already seen the pattern behind someone's behavior, their performance stops being intimidating. It becomes predictable. Victoria stepped out first. Of course she did. Sunglasses. Linen set. That same composed expression she wore like armor, the one that said she belonged anywhere she decided to stand. She paused, looked at the house, then gave a small nod. Not bad, she said as she walked past me. We'll make it work. We. I didn't correct her. Not yet. My father followed behind her, slower, carrying a single bag. His eyes met mine for a brief second. There was something there. Not understanding. Not yet. But something closer than before. Paige stepped out last, already scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up. The three of them moved inside like they had done it before. Like this was just another space being reassigned. Victoria walked straight to the staircase. I assume the primary is upstairs facing the water, she called over her shoulder. It is, I said evenly. Good, she replied. We'll take that. Not, can we? Not, would that be okay? Just a statement. Within 30 minutes, my clothes were folded loosely and placed in a pile outside the bedroom. My bedroom. Garment bags replaced them. Perfume I didn't own. Shoes I didn't wear. A life that wasn't mine. Settling into a space that was. Paige claimed the ocean view guest room without discussion, and I was left with the smallest room downstairs. Originally designed for storage. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the narrow bed, the single window facing the side yard, the quiet irony of it all. Then I stepped inside, closed the door, and sat down. Not defeated, not even angry, just aware. Because here's something people don't talk about enough. When disrespect becomes consistent, it stops shocking you. It starts informing you. That afternoon, Victoria hosted a small welcome dinner. 5 couples, No notice. Using groceries I had bought. Wine I had selected. Plates I had unpacked less than 24 hours earlier. I moved through the kitchen quietly, refilling glasses, clearing plates, listening. Because people reveal more when they think you're not part of the conversation. And Gerald finally got the beach house, Victoria said lightly, gesturing around the room. It was time. Laughter. Compliments. Admiration. Not one person asked a question. Not one person looked at me and wondered. And I let that happen. Because I didn't need them to understand. Not yet. Around 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped into the hallway and checked it. An email. From Marcus. Subject line. Preliminary report complete. I opened it. One sentence stood out immediately. Signature is highly consistent with simulated forgery. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just confirmation. I went back into the kitchen, picked up a dish towel, and continued cleaning. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do in a moment like that is not show your hand too early. Tell me where you're listening from. Because stories like this don't belong to just one place. And neither does the moment you decide. You've had enough. I woke up before everyone else. 5:42 a.m. The house was quiet in that unfamiliar way, like it was holding its breath around people who didn't belong to its rhythm yet. I slipped out the back door and walked toward the shoreline. The sand still cool, the sky just beginning to shift from gray to gold. That's where I made the next call. Marcus picked up immediately. I read it, I said. Then you know, he replied. I know it's not a mistake. There was a pause. Not hesitation, just acknowledgement. The full report will be stronger, he added. But this already holds weight. I watched a wave fold into itself and disappear. How bad is it? I asked quietly. Marcus didn't soften it. Bad enough that this isn't just a family issue. I closed my eyes for a second, because that was the line. The one you don't cross lightly. Family and law. Emotion and consequence. When you've lived through something long enough, he continued, you start thinking of it as normal. But from the outside, Bonnie, this is structured, intentional. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I want everything, I said. Every account, every transfer, every document. Then we build a file, he said simply. And that's what we started doing. Not loudly, not publicly, but thoroughly. By mid-morning, the house had come alive behind me. Doors opening. Footsteps. Victoria's voice carrying through the hallway like she had always lived there. I stayed on the beach longer than I needed to. Because I knew something had shifted, and once it does, you can't pretend you don't see it anymore. When I walked back in, she was already at the kitchen island, flipping through a magazine. She looked up briefly. You should pick up more fresh flowers, she said. The entryway feels empty. I set my keys down. I'll consider it. She smiled slightly. That kind of smile. The one that isn't warmth. It's assessment. That evening, another email came in from Marcus. This one didn't need interpretation. 3 accounts. IRA withdrawals. Credit line. Trust account. Total. $1.842 million. I sat on the edge of the small bed in my room and stared at the number. Not because of the amount, but because of how quietly it had been taken. How neatly. How confidently. As if no one would ever question it. And for years, no one had. Some of you listening know what it's like to realize the problem wasn't one moment. It was a system, a pattern, a design you were never meant to see clearly. That night, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't bring it up at dinner. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I did something far more important. I made a decision. Not about revenge, not about exposure, but about timing. Because truth doesn't just need to be told. It needs to be placed where it can't be ignored. And I already knew exactly where that place would be. If you're still here with me, this is where things begin to change. Subscribe for strength. Because what came next wasn't loud, but it was final. I didn't choose a courtroom. That surprises people when they hear this part. Because on paper, that's the obvious route. File the complaint. Let the system take over. Let everything unfold behind closed doors. Clean, quiet, contained. But here's the truth no one really says out loud. Silence is where people like Victoria do their best work. Behind doors. Between signatures. Inside assumptions no one double checks. I wasn't interested in noise. But I was done with invisibility. So I chose a place where truth wouldn't be whispered. The Low Country Legal Foundation Gala. June 14th. 84 days away. Victoria's night. Her award. Her stage. When I told Marcus, he didn't react right away. He just studied me for a moment. "You're not trying to embarrass her," he said carefully. "No," I replied. "I'm making sure she can't rewrite it." That distinction mattered. Because this wasn't about taking something from her. It was about stopping her from taking anything else. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we do it properly," he said. "Everything verified. Everything documented. No gaps." And just like that, it became a plan. 3 phases. Build. Protect. Reveal. April became about building. Documents, reports, statements. Marcus filed subpoenas. The forensic examiner began a full comparison. Every number, every signature, every transfer stacked carefully, like something that would have to stand under weight. And while all of that was happening, life inside the house continued. Or more accurately, Victoria's version of life continued. She changed the living room within a week. New furniture, new color palette, new layout. No conversation, just invoices. One afternoon, I came home to a $12,000 bill sitting on the counter with a sticky note. "Bonnie, please take care of this, thanks." I paid it. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something she didn't. Comfort makes people careless. And I needed her comfortable. Every Friday, she hosted what she called sunset socials. 5 or 6 couples. Wine. Laughter. Stories that somehow always placed her at the center. I moved through those evenings quietly. Listening. Observing. Because when someone believes they're untouchable, they stop editing themselves. One night, I overheard her telling a guest, "Bonnie's going through a phase. Left her little job. We're here to stabilize things." The woman nodded sympathetically, looked at me like I was fragile. I smiled, refilled her glass, and kept listening. Because perception is one of the most powerful currencies in a room like that. And Victoria had spent years building hers. But what she didn't realize was this. Perception doesn't survive contact with evidence. If you've ever been misunderstood in a room full of people who didn't ask questions, you know how isolating that feels. But stay with me. Because isolation doesn't last forever when truth is patient. And I was very patient. By the second week of April, the house no longer felt new. Not because of time, because of presence. Victoria had settled in completely, like the space had always been hers, like I had simply returned to something she had been holding. She replaced the artwork in the hallway, rearranged the kitchen cabinets, even changed the scent of the house candles I didn't buy, flowers I didn't choose, details so subtle that anyone visiting would assume they reflected the owner. That was always her way. She didn't take things loudly. She absorbed them, until there was nothing left that felt like you. One afternoon, I found her standing in the foyer, speaking to a contractor. "Yes, I want to open this wall slightly," she said, gesturing. "It'll make the entry feel more expansive." I stepped closer. "That wall stays," I said calmly. She turned, surprised not by the words, but by the tone. Flat. Certain. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled. "We'll revisit it," she said lightly, dismissing the contractor with a wave. Revisit. Another word that meant, I'll get my way later. But something in her expression shifted, just slightly. Because for the first time, I hadn't softened the boundary. That evening, Marcus called. "The subpoena's approved," he said. "Full bank records in 2 weeks." "Good." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. We found activity tied to a second device, likely hers. Searches related to property transfers." My grip tightened on the phone. "She's not just taking," I said quietly. "She's planning ahead," Marcus confirmed. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out toward the porch. Victoria was outside, laughing with 2 women from her circle, a glass of wine in her hand, posture relaxed, effortless, untouchable. Or so it seemed. "Marcus," I said, "how strong is the case now?" "Stronger every day," he replied. "But Bonnie, timing still matters." I knew that. Because truth alone doesn't change anything. Timing does. Placement does. Context does. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked into the kitchen for water and noticed something on the counter. Victoria's iPad. Unlocked. browser still open. I didn't touch it right away. I just stood there, looking at the screen. Because sometimes the moment before you confirm something is the last moment you can still pretend you're wrong. Then I picked it up. The search history was right there. How to add name to property deed, South Carolina. No subtlety. No hesitation. Just intention. I set the iPad back exactly where I found it, turned off the light, and stood there in the dark for a second. Not shocked, not even angry. Just finished. Because there's a point in every situation like this where you stop asking whether someone will cross the line and accept that they already have. Some of you listening have been there, that quiet moment when everything clicks, and you realize the situation isn't confusing anymore. It's clear, and clarity doesn't need emotion. It needs action. I went back to my room, closed the door, and wrote one sentence in my notebook. She thinks this house is next. Then I underlined it, twice, because now, this wasn't just about what she had already taken. It was about what she was about to take, and that I wasn't going to allow. The bank records arrived on the first Monday of May. Marcus called me at 11:32 a.m. "Come in," he said. "You'll want to see this in person." I didn't ask questions. I already knew this wasn't something you absorb over a phone call. I drove straight from the island, the sky heavy with that slow coastal heat that makes everything feel suspended, like time stretches just a little longer than it should. Marcus had everything laid out when I walked in. Not scattered. Organized. Tabs, labels, chronological order. That was his way. Make the truth impossible to misinterpret. He didn't speak right away. He just turned the first page toward me. "Start here." I sat down, and I read, 4 IRA withdrawals, $380,000 total. Dates spaced out just enough to avoid attention. Each one routed into an account under the name V. Hale. I flipped the page. Credit account. Opened, under my father's name. Charges listed cleanly: travel, luxury retail, spa services. Total, $47,000. I kept going. The third section made my chest tighten slightly. Savings account. Title, V. Hale Trust. Balance, $215,000. Transfers labeled as household expenses. Groceries. Maintenance. Utilities. All small enough individually to look normal. All consistent enough together to form something else entirely. I leaned back in the chair. Not overwhelmed. Just very aware. "This is everything?" I asked. Marcus shook his head once. "This is everything we can prove so far." He slid a summary page toward me. $1,842,000. I stared at the number again. It didn't feel bigger this time. It felt clearer. Because at some point it stops being about how much was taken and starts being about how deliberately it was done. "She didn't rush," I said quietly. "No," Marcus agreed. "She relied on time. On trust. On no one checking." I nodded. That part made sense. Because when something is taken slowly enough, it doesn't trigger alarm. It becomes background. And background is where most things get away with existing. Some of you listening know exactly what that feels like. Not a single moment that breaks you, but a pattern that wears you down quietly over years. "What happens if we act now?" I asked. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "She gets charged," he said, immediately. "And my father?" "He finds out the same day." I exhaled slowly, because that was the part no one talks about. The cost of truth, not in money, in impact. "He won't be ready," I said. Marcus didn't argue. "Then we prepare him," he replied. "But not too early. If she senses anything, she'll start covering tracks." I looked down at the documents again. Every page steady. Every number clean. Every move intentional. "No," I said finally. "We do this once, and we do it where she can't reshape it." Marcus met my eyes. "The gala." "Yes." He nodded. "Then everything from this point forward has to hold under pressure." "It will," I said. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was leading it. Because when clarity replaces confusion, you don't move faster. You move with purpose. We chose June 1st to tell my father. Not sooner. Not later. 13 days before the gala. Enough time for him to process the truth, but not enough time for it to be reshaped, softened, or quietly redirected. Timing mattered now more than anything. Because once something like this is spoken out loud, it can't be unsaid. The days leading up to it felt strangely normal. That's the unsettling part. Victoria continued exactly as she always had. Morning routines, afternoon errands, evening gatherings. As if nothing underneath the surface had shifted. As if everything was still under her control. She spent hours planning the gala. Dress fittings, hair consultations, speech rehearsals in front of the mirror in the master bedroom, my bedroom, her voice rising and falling with practiced humility. I'm so honored. I never expected recognition. This community means everything to me. I would pass by the hallway and hear her voice echo slightly through the door. Polished, perfect, completely detached from reality, and yet convincing. That's what made her dangerous. Not what she did, but how easily people believed what she said. On May 28th, she stopped me in the kitchen. You are attending the gala, right? She asked. I looked up from my coffee. Yes. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Family presence matters. You'll sit toward the back, of course. Of course. Of course, I replied. She studied me for a second. Wear something simple, she added. This isn't your night. I held her gaze. I understand. And I did. Just not in the way she thought. Because some of you listening know this moment, when someone thinks they've already assigned you your place, but they don't realize you've quietly stepped out of it. June 1st arrived early, 5:45 a.m. My father was already on the porch when I walked out, coffee in hand, watching the water. He looked older in that light. Not physically, but aware in a way he hadn't been before. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Not really. I sat down beside him. For a minute, neither of us spoke, just the sound of waves. Wind through the railing, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Walk with me, I said finally. We made our way down to the beach. No phones, no interruptions, just space. When we reached the shoreline, I stopped, opened the folder I had brought with me, and handed it to him. He didn't ask what it was. He just took it and started reading, page by page, slowly, carefully. His hands began to tremble about halfway through, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. The kind of tremble that doesn't come from surprise, but from recognition. We stood there for several minutes, the ocean moving in front of us, the truth settling between us. Finally, he spoke. I didn't sign this. His voice was quiet, but clear. I know, I said. He kept looking down at the documents. I didn't authorize any of this. I know. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he looked up at me, and I saw it. Not confusion, not denial, just grief. I should have seen it, he said. I shook my head gently. She made sure you didn't. And for the first time in years, we weren't standing on opposite sides of a story. We were standing in the same one. Together. We didn't go back inside right away. My father stood there with the folder still in his hands, the pages shifting slightly in the morning breeze, as if even the paper couldn't stay completely still after what it held. I trusted her, he said. Not defensively, not as an excuse, just as a fact. He was finally seeing clearly. I didn't interrupt, because when someone reaches that point on their own, you don't rush them through it. You let it land. I thought I was protecting the family, he continued, his voice quieter now, keeping things stable. I nodded. I know. And I did. Because for years I had watched him choose peace over truth. Not because he didn't care. Because he didn't know how to hold both at the same time. He looked back down at the documents, then slowly closed the folder. What do you need from me? He asked. That question mattered more than anything else he could have said. Not what should I do. Not how bad is this. What do you need? I need you to be honest, I said. Completely. Even if it's uncomfortable. He nodded immediately. I can do that. And I need you to wait, I added. No confrontation. Not yet. That part was harder. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened slightly. But he still agreed. If that's what it takes, he said. It is. Because this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be undone. 2 days later, Marcus met us at his office. My father signed a sworn affidavit. Every page reviewed. Every statement clear. He confirmed, in writing, that he had not authorized any transfers, any accounts, any property changes. No hesitation. No ambiguity. When he finished, he set the pen down slowly. "That's it?" he asked. "For now," Marcus replied. But we all knew that wasn't really the end of anything. It was the beginning. As we walked out of the office, my father stopped on the sidewalk. He didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, his expression had changed. Not lighter, but steadier. "I'm sorry," he said. I held his gaze. "For what?" "For not seeing you," he replied. That landed deeper than everything else. Because some of you listening know, it's not always the loud harm that stays with you. Sometimes it's the years of being overlooked by the one person who was supposed to notice. I didn't rush to respond. I just nodded once. "I'm here now," he added. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. If you've ever waited years to hear something that simple, you understand how quiet that moment feels. No big reaction. No dramatic release. Just something finally sitting where it should have been all along. That night, back at the house, nothing looked different. Victoria was still in the kitchen, still moving through the space like it belonged to her, still planning, still certain. And that was exactly what I needed, because the more certain she felt, the less she questioned anything. And the less she questioned, the closer we got to a truth she wouldn't be able to control. The last 13 days moved quickly, not in the way time usually does, but in that compressed, focused way where everything matters and nothing is accidental. Victoria spent those days preparing for the gala like it was the defining moment of her life. Maybe it was, just not in the way she expected. Every afternoon, there was something new. A stylist appointment, a dress fitting, jewelry laid out across the bed like options for a life she believed was already secured. I passed her room once while the door was open. She was standing in front of the mirror, practicing her speech again. "I'm deeply honored," she said softly, adjusting the way her hand rested over her chest. There was something unsettling about it. Not because it was fake, because it was practiced enough to feel real. That's what made people believe her. She didn't just perform. She rehearsed until it became natural. Meanwhile, everything on our side was tightening into place. Marcus finalized the full evidence file. Forensic report, bank statements, affidavit, account tracing, everything verified, everything cross-checked, nothing left open to interpretation. "This holds," he told me during our last meeting before the event. "It has to," I said. Because once this happened, there would be no pulling it back. That same week, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Della Fairchild, a senior editor, but more importantly, someone who had known my mother. When she answered, her voice softened the moment I said my name. "Bonnie?" There was a pause. "I haven't heard from you in a long time." "I know," I said. "I need to talk to you about something important." We met the next day. I didn't give her a story. I gave her documents. She read quietly, carefully, no interruptions. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me in a way that felt grounding. "This isn't speculation," she said. "No, this is a pattern." "Yes," she nodded once. "If I publish anything, it will be verified independently. That's what I want. Because this wasn't about exposure for attention. It was about accuracy and permanence." That night, back at the house, Victoria stopped me in the hallway. "You've been very quiet lately," she said. I met her eyes. "I've been thinking." She smiled slightly. "Try not to overthink things, Bonnie. It tends to make you reactive." I held her gaze for a second longer than usual. Then I said, calmly, "I'm not reacting anymore." Something in her expression shifted. Just a flicker. Gone almost immediately. But it was there. Because when someone is used to controlling the narrative, they notice when they no longer are. The night before the gala, I barely slept. Not from anxiety. From clarity. Everything was in place. Every piece where it needed to be. There was nothing left to prepare. Only one thing left to do. And if you've ever reached that point, where the outcome no longer feels uncertain, just inevitable, you know how quiet your mind becomes. Before I turned off the light, I looked around the small room I had been staying in. The narrow bed. The single window. The space I had been pushed into. And I realized something. I didn't feel small in it anymore. Because where you are doesn't define your place. What you accept does. And I wasn't accepting that version of my life anymore. Not after tomorrow. Not ever again. The morning of the gala didn't feel dramatic. No storm. No tension in the air. Just stillness. The kind that comes when everything has already been decided, you're just waiting for the world to catch up. I woke up at 6 a.m., earlier than usual, and for the first time in weeks, I felt rested. Not relieved. Not excited. Just steady. Down the hall, I could already hear movement. Victoria. Closet doors opening. Hangers shifting. The soft rhythm of someone preparing to be seen. I took my time getting ready. Simple black dress. Nothing elaborate. Nothing distracting. Because this night wasn't about presentation. It was about clarity. When I walked into the kitchen, Victoria was already there. Dressed, polished, composed. She looked at me once. Head tilted slightly. "At least you kept it appropriate," she said. I poured coffee. "I thought that would matter." She nodded, satisfied. "It does." She paused, then added almost casually, "Tonight will be important. For all of us." I met her eyes. "Yes," I said. "It will." My father didn't say much during the drive. He sat in the passenger seat, hands folded, gaze forward, not withdrawn, not anxious, just present in a way I hadn't seen before. Sometimes, when the truth finally settles in, it doesn't make you louder. It makes you quieter, more certain. We arrived just before 8 p.m. The ballroom was already full. Soft lighting, low music, conversations layered over each other like a practiced rhythm. Everything about it felt controlled, curated, perfect. Victoria moved through the room effortlessly, smiling, greeting, receiving, the version of herself she had spent years building. And for a moment, watching her, I understood why people believed her. Because confidence, when it's consistent enough, looks like truth. I took my seat near the back, exactly where she had placed me. Marcus sat beside me, his briefcase at his feet. No words, just a small nod. We both knew. This wasn't a conversation. It was a moment. Across the room, I saw Della, notebook open, watching, not reacting, just ready. At the front, my father sat beside Victoria, straight posture, hands still, eyes forward. There was distance between them now, not physical, something quieter than that, something that doesn't need to be explained. At 8:30, the room began to settle, glasses placed down, chairs aligned, attention shifting toward the stage. Victoria adjusted her posture slightly, smoothed her dress, prepared. This was the moment she had been rehearsing, the one she believed would confirm everything she had built. The microphone clicked. A voice began speaking. Formal, measured, expected, and for a brief second, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. But some of you already know. There's a difference between what looks right and what actually is. And once that line is crossed, it doesn't uncross. I felt Marcus shift slightly beside me. The room held its breath. And just like that, it began. Before we proceed with the awards this evening, the voice from the stage was steady, formal, practiced, nothing unusual. And yet something in the room shifted, not visibly, but you could feel it, like a current just beneath the surface. Victoria straightened slightly in her chair, not alarmed, just attentive, because this was her moment, her recognition, her confirmation. The board has requested a brief pause regarding one of tonight's honorees. A murmur moved through the room, soft, controlled, but present. Victoria's fingers tightened just slightly around the edge of the tablecloth, still composed, still smiling, because people like her don't react first. They assess, then adjust. This matter involves new information that requires clarification before we continue. That was when the silence deepened. Not confusion. Not yet, but attention. Focused. Sharpened. Victoria stood. Graceful. Measured. "This is highly unusual," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard without seeming disruptive. "Perhaps this could be addressed privately?" A few heads nodded. Agreement. Support. Familiar patterns. Handle it quietly. Don't disturb the room. Don't disrupt the image. From the stage, the response came without hesitation. "It will be addressed here." That was the moment. The exact moment. Everything shifted from controlled to irreversible. My name was called. Not loudly, but clearly enough that every conversation stopped, every head turned, and just like that, the room that had never really seen me was looking directly at me. I stood slowly, not to make a statement, not to create effect, just because it was time. Marcus didn't say anything as I picked up the envelope. He didn't need to. We had already said everything that mattered. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was, not because of distance, because of awareness. Every step measured, every sound amplified. Heels against polished floor, fabric shifting, eyes following, some curious, some skeptical, some already deciding what they believed. If you've ever walked into a moment where you knew people had already formed opinions about you, you know that feeling. But here's the difference. This time, I wasn't there to be understood. I was there to be clear. I stepped onto the stage, set the envelope down, adjusted the microphone slightly, and looked out. At faces that had never asked questions before. At a room that had accepted a version of truth because it was presented well. I took one breath. Not to calm myself, to center. I'm not here to create a scene, I began. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. I'm here because something that should have been addressed privately wasn't. A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but undeniable. I opened the envelope, removed the first document, held it steady. On April 12th, a property transfer was filed under my father's name. I paused. Not for effect. For clarity. He did not sign it. And just like that, the room wasn't controlled anymore. It was listening. You could feel the shift immediately. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just a room recalibrating. Because when certainty is interrupted, people don't react right away. They pause. They reassess. They listen differently. I placed the document on the podium and stepped slightly to the side so the screen behind me could display it. A clean scan. Official seal. Signature at the bottom. At first glance, nothing unusual. That signature, I said calmly, has been reviewed by a certified forensic examiner. I let the next words land without rushing them. It is not authentic. Silence. Not polite silence. Not social silence. The kind that settles when people realize something is no longer hypothetical. From the front table, my father stood. Slowly. Deliberately. I did not sign that document, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Because truth, when spoken at the right moment, carries. Victoria turned toward him sharply. Gerald, she began. But he didn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward. And that, more than anything else, changed the room. Because people weren't just hearing a claim anymore. They were seeing alignment. I moved to the next document. Between January and October of last year, 4 withdrawals were made from my father's retirement account. The screen shifted. Dates. Amounts. Highlighted entries. Total, $380,000. A few people shifted in their seats. Subtle, but noticeable. These funds were transferred into an account registered under the name V. Hale. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Because the pattern was beginning to form, and once people see a pattern, they don't unsee it. I continued. A secondary credit account was also opened using my father's information. Another page. Another set of numbers. Current balance, $47,000. Victoria's voice cut through, sharper now. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react. I just continued. A third account, labeled as a trust, holds $215,000 transferred from joint funds under routine expense categories. I placed the final page down. Total amount, approximately $1.8 million. There it was. Not exaggerated. Not dramatized. Just complete. Some of you listening know this moment. When everything that once felt scattered suddenly lines up in a way no one can ignore. Victoria stood now, fully. Composure still there but thinner. This is inappropriate, she said, her voice tight. This is not how matters like this are handled. I met her eyes. For the first time that night. You're right, I said calmly. It should have been handled earlier. That landed. Because it wasn't an attack. It was a boundary. Judge Holt stepped forward slightly from the side. The information presented has been reviewed, he said, and will be referred for formal investigation. That was it. No shouting. No spectacle. Just a shift in authority. Victoria looked around the room, waiting for support. For someone to step in, to question, to defend. No one did. Because when clarity replaces assumption, silence changes sides. And for the first time, It wasn't protecting her anymore. Victoria didn't sit back down. She stayed standing, perfect posture, shoulders back, chin slightly raised like if she held the shape long enough, the moment would pass. "This is a family matter," she said, her voice steadier now. "It's being misrepresented." There it was. Not denial. Reframing. I had seen it my entire life. Take something real and rename it until it sounds smaller. Less serious. Easier to dismiss. But something had changed in the room. People weren't just hearing her words anymore. They were weighing them against what they had just seen. And that's a very different position to be in. Before I could respond, another voice came from across the room. "I'd like to add something." Heads turned. A woman stood from one of the middle tables, early 60s. Composed. Steady. Not nervous. "My name is Helen Briggs," she said. Victoria froze. Not dramatically, but enough. Because recognition doesn't need volume. It shows in stillness. "I was previously married to a man named Richard Briggs," Helen continued. "And I've seen this pattern before." The word hung in the air. Pattern. Not incident. Not misunderstanding. Pattern. She stepped forward slightly, holding a document. In 2009, funds were transferred from joint accounts into a private account under the same name structure. She paused, letting the room absorb it. The circumstances were nearly identical. No one interrupted. No one dismissed it. Because now it wasn't just one situation. It was repetition. And repetition changes everything. Victoria shook her head slightly. "This is absurd," she said. "You're bringing up something from years ago." Helen didn't raise her voice. "I stayed quiet then," she said. "I'm not staying quiet now." That line settled deeper than anything else. Because silence, once broken, doesn't go back to what it was. Judge Holt stepped forward again. "The award will not be presented this evening," he said clearly. No hesitation. No discussion. Just a decision. Victoria's composure finally shifted. Not shattered, but cracked. "You're making a mistake," she said, looking around the room. But no one responded. No one reassured her. No one stepped in. Because the room had already moved. Not physically, but in understanding. And once people move in that direction, they don't return to where they were. My father stepped away from the table and walked toward the stage. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stood beside me. And that, more than anything else, closed the distance that had existed for years. If you've ever had someone finally stand with you after a long time of standing alone, you know how quiet that moment feels. No applause. No reaction. Just alignment. Victoria looked at us both, then at the room, then back again. And for the first time, she didn't try to correct the narrative. She picked up her bag, turned, and walked out. No one followed. Because sometimes the loudest consequence is the absence of support. The door closed behind Victoria with a soft final click. No slam, no scene, just absence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the room slowly exhaled. Conversations didn't resume the way they had before. Voices stayed lower, careful, measured, as if everyone understood they had just witnessed something that couldn't be undone or unseen. Judge Holt stepped away from the podium, speaking quietly with two board members. Helen returned to her seat without looking back. Marcus remained still beside the stage, watching, not reacting. I turned slightly. My father was still there. Not behind me. Not observing from a distance. Beside me. That difference mattered. He placed his hand lightly on the edge of the podium, steadying himself more than anything else. "I'm filing on Monday," he said quietly. I nodded. Not in relief. Not in victory. Just acknowledgement. Because this wasn't an ending. It was the point where everything finally stopped pretending. We left the ballroom without staying for the rest of the program. No one stopped us. A few people nodded as we passed quiet acknowledgement. Nothing performative. The kind of respect that doesn't ask for attention. Outside, the night air felt different. Cooler, cleaner. My father walked beside me in silence until we reached the car. He didn't rush to open the door. Didn't reach for his phone. He just stood there for a moment, looking out at the street like he was recalibrating something internal. "I should have asked more questions," he said finally. I leaned lightly against the passenger door. "Maybe," I replied. "But you're asking them now." He nodded once, absorbing that. On the drive back to the beach house, neither of us turned on the radio. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was settled. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still on. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. Her things still in the closet, her perfume still in the air. But the energy had shifted. Not because she was gone, because the truth had stayed. Victoria didn't come back that night. Her suitcases were still upstairs, dresses hanging where mine used to be, shoes lined neatly along the floor like nothing had shifted. But the house felt returned. Not empty, just quieter in a way that belonged to me again. My father stood in the hallway for a moment, looking toward the staircase. "I'll stay in the guest room," he said. I nodded. "Take whatever space you need." He hesitated, then added, "I'm going to make some calls in the morning." I know. There was nothing else to explain. Later, I sat on the porch alone. The same chair. The same ocean. But this time, I wasn't bracing for anything. The phone didn't ring. No one told me to leave. No one reassigned my place. And for the first time since I bought the house, it actually felt like mine. Morning came slowly. Not rushed, not heavy, just quiet. I woke up to the sound of the ocean and sunlight stretching across the floor, no footsteps in the hallway, no voice directing the day before it had even begun. Downstairs, my father was already in the kitchen. Coffee brewing. 2 cups. He looked up when I walked in. "I called an attorney," he said. "Divorce filing starts today." I nodded. Not surprised. Not relieved. Just certain. Because this wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. One that should have happened a long time ago but still mattered now. We sat at the table without saying much. And for once, the silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like honesty. Later, I walked through the house. Room by room. Opening windows. Letting the air shift. Not reclaiming it. Just living in it. Because the truth is, nothing I did that night gave me this house. I already had it. What I took back was my place inside it. If you've ever had to stand quietly just to be seen clearly, stay with this space.